11:47 on the Wednesday, and Beatrix Lund was sitting in our good meeting room with her hands off the keyboard, looking at a screen that 8 of us could also see. She had asked to log in as an ordinary member of staff at one of the schools, so we had given her a deputy head's account at Ashcombe, and she had typed a surname into the search box the way any deputy head would on any Wednesday morning. What came back was 14 children. 4 of them were at Ashcombe. The rest were at Pinhale, at Redgrave, at the little prep school out past the reservoir that only has 90 pupils and pays us more per head than anybody. One of the results had a small red marker beside it, which in our system means there is a safeguarding note attached, and a deputy head at Ashcombe should not have been able to see that the child existed, let alone that the marker was there. Nobody said anything for what felt like a very long time. I could hear the projector fan and somebody's chair creaking at the far end. Beatrix took her glasses off, put them back on, and clicked once into the record, and the screen filled up with another school's medical information: an inhaler, a nut allergy, a mobile number for a mother who had asked us in writing 2 years ago to be the only listed contact. Vaughan leaned forward with his elbows on the table and said, in the pleasant voice he used with head teachers, that this would be a caching thing, probably, a display issue, nothing underneath it. Beatrix wrote something down. I was already logging in on my own laptop from the far side of the table, and I could see the list of permission groups that decides who is allowed to see which children, and where there should have been 11 of them, 1 for each school, there was 1. Back in March, I had been on the phone to a bursar in Devon at 6 in the morning about a report that would not print, and that was normal, because there are 3 of us who look after the student record system for 11 private schools and about 9,000 children, and the phone is the job. My name is Elliot. I do the boring end. The overnight jobs that pull attendance into the registers, the thing that emails parents when a child is marked absent, the permission groups. Duncan does the deep plumbing and has done for 11 years. Lydia had been with us 6 months and was better than either of us at anything with a screen in it, and worse than either of us at knowing which sleeping dog was which, because nobody had written any of it down for her. My personal situation, since it matters later, was a house. Nia and I had been in a rented flat above a chemist for 6 years with a daughter who had learned to walk on a floor that sloped, and in August we had exchanged contracts on a semi with a garden in Marsden, completion on Friday the 26th of September. Exchanged. Deposit gone. Then booked. Maisie already told which room was hers. The mortgage worked because I was going to be lead engineer from the summer round, which was not a fantasy I had invented on my own. Vaughan had told me so in March, in a corridor, with a hand on my shoulder. Vaughan Ellery ran delivery. In my own head I had stopped using his name at some point and just called him commercially, because that was the word he reached for when the answer was no. Commercially, that's not where we are. Commercially, I can't sell that to the board. When he was about to refuse you something, he would take his glasses off, fold them, and set them down on the table in front of him, deliberately, like a man putting a tool back in a box, and then he would tell you why not. I want to be fair about him, because I did like him for a while. He knew every bursar at every school by name, and he knew their kids' names too, which took real effort. When Pinhale's server cupboard flooded on a Sunday, he sat on the phone with their head for an hour and a half and never once told her it wasn't our problem. He grew pears and brought them in a supermarket bag and left them in the kitchen with a note saying they were free and slightly wasp damaged. On the 9th of March, I got to my desk at 7:10 and started clearing the queue, which is how I like to start, because at that time of day nobody is talking to you. There was a ticket about a label printer at Redgrave that was printing everything at half size. There was a ticket about a boy who existed twice because 2 members of staff had typed his name differently. And there was a ticket that Vaughan had raised himself, in the same system the schools use, assigned to me, because he had learned to raise tickets rather than tap you on the shoulder after the school's governing body had complained about untraceable requests. He had written it in his own words and left his name on the top of it, the way you do. I read it, I did what it said, and I put a comment on it saying done, and then I went and got a bacon roll. What it said was that the attendance release had to be with the schools before the summer term started, and that until it was out, changes should go straight to the live system without waiting for a second person to read them and write down what they did. That gate is the one real safety thing we have. It is not clever. It just refuses to let a change reach the schools until somebody who is not you has read it, said it looks all right, and typed a sentence explaining what it changes and why. That sentence is the only written record of anything we do. Turn the gate off and both halves go. Nobody reads it, and nothing gets written down. He knew what he was asking for, because I had explained it to him twice, and the ticket says to skip the second reader and the write-up in those words, and that he would take responsibility. The attendance release went out on time. Everyone was pleased. The gate stayed off, because turning it back on in April would have meant somebody sitting down and writing up 6 weeks of changes nobody could remember, and there was always a school with a hair on fire. The audit was booked for September. Beatrix Lund was coming for 3 days on behalf of the body the schools all belonged to, and in May her list of requests arrived, and I read it standing up in the kitchen with a bag of Vaughan's pears next to my elbow. She wanted a written record of every change made to the system in the previous 12 months, and who had approved each one. She wanted the written procedure for restoring records if we lost them. She wanted a written statement of who can see what. And she wanted to sit with us and watch us prove that one school could not see another school's children. I said it out loud in the readiness meeting on the Thursday, in a room with Vaughan and Harriet and Joyce and kin from infrastructure in it. And I said it in the flattest way I could manage, because I had learned that the more worked up I sounded, the more Vaughan enjoyed being the calm one. I said we could not produce a list of changes and approvals, because since the 9th of March there had been no second reader and no written description on anything. Roughly 140 changes with nothing next to them, but a date and a name. I said the restore instructions in our internal handbook were 3 years old and pointed at a machine we switched off last summer. I said if she asked us to show her the paper trail, we would be standing there with our hands out. Vaughan let me finish, which he always did, and then he took his glasses off, folded them, and put them down on the table. Commercially, he said, we are not rebuilding our process in audit season. He said auditors want to see a system that works and schools that are happy, and we had both. He said he would rather I spent the summer on the 6th form timetable import than on paperwork, and that if it came to it we could write a summary the week before, a nice document, and if there were gaps we would present them as planned improvements. Harriet asked whether the checks being off was a problem in itself, and Vaughan said the checks were a nice to have that a team of 3 could not afford, and that the real control was that we were experienced people who knew what we were doing. And he looked at me while he said it in a way that made it sound like a compliment and land like a warning. Joyce messaged me 8 minutes later. She is our tester and she has the instincts of a woman who has been blamed for other people's work before. Can you put what you just said into a ticket? She wrote. So it is mine as well as yours. I did. It sat there in the queue with nobody assigned to it, and a state of open, and I checked on it sometimes the way you check a bruise. Lydia had a different reaction, which was to ask me in the corridor, genuinely, whether it was normal that she had never once had anything she wrote read by another person. She had come from a company where you could not so much as change the color of a button without 2 people signing their names to it. I told her it was not normal, that it had been switched off in March to get the attendance work out, and that until somebody turned it back on she should assume that anything she pushed went to 9,000 children with nobody standing behind her. She said right, and then she said, so who turns it back on? And I said Vaughan, and she made a face and went to get a coffee. June went. July went. The summer round came and Vaughan sat me down in the small room with the broken blind and told me that commercially he could not create a lead role this cycle, that the schools were squeezing us on renewal, and that he would fight for me in January. He said I had absolutely earned it, which is a thing people say when they are giving you nothing. I said I had exchanged on a house in August on the strength of March, and he said he understood. And he did the thing with the glasses, and I went and sat in my car in the multi-story for 20 minutes. Ken from infrastructure handed his notice in at the end of July and left in August, and the 2 evening jobs he used to babysit landed on Duncan. Duncan stopped taking lunch. Nobody ever turned the check back on. So that was the Wednesday. 11:47, one permission group where there should have been 11, and a deputy head's account at Ashcombe able to search 9,000 children in 11 schools, medical notes, contact restrictions, safeguarding markers, all of it, and an auditor at the end of the table writing in a notebook with a proper pen. I said, out loud, that I needed to stop this now, and Harriet said do it, and I switched off the search entirely for every school by lunchtime, which is a blunt thing to do in the middle of a school day, and which I would do again. Then we tried to put it back, and everything we tried failed for its own separate reason, and the whole afternoon was that. The first thing was the obvious thing. Lydia had pushed a change on the Friday afternoon, a job Vaughan had asked her for directly, merging duplicate staff accounts across schools so the renewal numbers looked cleaner. Nobody read it. Nobody wrote down what it did. What it actually did, deep in the part of the system that decides who sees which children, was treat our 11 separate permission groups as duplicates of each other and fold them into one. So we reversed her change. Kin was gone. So it was me, and it took 9 minutes, and it changed nothing, because putting the old instructions back does not put the old furniture back. The instructions were fine now. The 11 groups were still gone. They had been deleted on Friday, and the reversal did not know they had ever existed. The second thing was the copy. We take a copy of everything every night, which is the one part of this I have always felt safe about, and I said so in the room. And Joyce said, then get last Thursday's and put the groups back, and I said yes. And then I opened the handbook page for restoring and read it properly for the first time in 2 years. 3 paragraphs. A machine name that no longer exists. A step that says ask Duncan for the password. The copies were being written somewhere only Duncan's own account could reach, by a script Duncan wrote, because Duncan had built it in a weekend in 2019 when nobody else was going to. And it had worked flawlessly every single night for 6 years, which is exactly why nobody had ever needed to know how. So the third thing was Duncan. Here is where it got genuinely bad. The overnight attendance job had failed on Monday night and again on Tuesday night, and Duncan had worked it both times, which meant he had come in on Monday morning, worked all day, worked the night, worked Tuesday night, and gone home at 9 o'clock on Wednesday morning, 2 hours before Beatrix logged in. He was asleep. His mobile rang out 11 times, and then it stopped ringing at all, because he puts it in a drawer when he sleeps after a night, and his flat has no landline. Joyce remembered he had been staying at his brother's while his boiler was out, and we did not have his brother's address. And Lydia offered to drive to Duncan's actual flat and lean on the buzzer, and Harriet said no. Let the man sleep. We will manage, and then said it again half an hour later in a voice with less conviction in it. We did not manage. What the room could see was 11 schools locked out of their own records at 1:30 on a Wednesday in September, which meant registers on paper, a school nurse in Penhale on the phone to me personally about a child's inhaler dose, and the office at Redgrave ringing every 4 minutes because they could not print the fire register. What the room could not see, until Joyce said it, was the reason none of us could fix it. She said it to the whole table, including Beatrix, in about the same tone you would use to read out a train time. She said there has been no second reader and no written description on any change since the 9th of March, so nobody in this building can tell you what changed last Friday, or in June, or in any of the other 140 times, because the check that would have made somebody write it down was switched off to get the attendance release out before term. Beatrix asked who switched it off, and Vaughan said he would have to look into the history there, and put his glasses down on the table. The fourth thing was me and Lydia trying to rebuild the 11 groups by hand, which we started at 2:30 and gave up on at 6. There is a spreadsheet, because there is always a spreadsheet. A bursar at Ashcombe had sent it in 2021, a lovely thing, color-coded, every job title at every school, and what it should be allowed to see. It was also from before 2 schools joined us, and before the 6th form merger, so we got it about 80% right, and then discovered at 10:06 that a caretaker's account at Redgrave could now read counselor notes, which was worse than the problem we had started with. We tore it out. Lydia went to the toilets and did not come back for a while. And when she did, her face was blotchy, and she said very quietly that she had pushed the change, and I said she had pushed a change she was told was urgent, at speed, with the check off and nobody reading it, and that if it had not been her on Friday, it would have been me in October. Duncan woke at 20 to 10, saw 31 missed calls, and was at his desk in 25 minutes in a fleece over a pajama top. He was not dramatic about it. He sat down, said give me the room, and then talked me through it while he worked, because I made him, because I was not going through this again. The copies went to a place he had set up under his own account with a key stored on a machine in the corner of the server room that everyone thought was a spare. He pulled Thursday's copy, put the 11 groups back one at a time, and had it done by 20 to 2 in the morning. Then he went home and I stayed. At 4 o'clock in the morning, I was alone in the office with the big lights off, building the list Beatrix had asked for in May, because she was coming back at 9 and Harriet had asked me for it. It was the worst piece of work I have ever done. 143 changes since the 9th of March, each one a date, a name, and a nothing. No description, no second reader, no approver. I had to open each one and read what it actually did in the raw and write a sentence in a document for a woman with a proper pen. I got to March in the list, near the bottom, and there was the entry where the gate itself was turned off, dated the 9th, with my name on it, because I am the one who typed it. And then I sat back, and I remembered the bacon roll. I found the ticket in about 11 seconds. I read it twice. Then I went down to the car park and stood next to my car in the dark until my hand stopped, and then I came back up and finished the document. The closing meeting was at 4 on the Thursday in the same room, because there was nowhere else, and it was full. Harriet at the head, Beatrix on her right with the notebook, Joyce, Lydia, Duncan gray and enormous in his chair, me at the far end with my laptop shut in front of me. Vaughan came in 3 minutes late with a printed sheet and said, before he sat, that he wanted to acknowledge that this had been a difficult 24 hours for the team. Harriet said, "Walk me through it." Vaughan walked her through a story I would honestly have believed if I had not been there. He said an inexperienced developer had pushed an unreviewed change to the live system on a Friday afternoon, that the consequences were severe, that this was a people and training problem, and that he was already thinking about how we onboard. Lydia went a color I did not like. Duncan said, without lifting his head, that she was told to do it and that no one has read anybody's work since March. Vaughan said he was not going to get into who was told what. Harriet asked him the second time, more slowly. She asked why there had been no second reader for 6 months. And this is the bit I had been waiting for without knowing I was waiting for it. He put his glasses down on the table, and he said that the controls in this team had been inadequate since before he arrived, that he had been asking for investment in process for a year, that he was as concerned as anybody, and then he said the thing. He said, and I want to be clear about this, if anyone had raised with me that those checks were switched off, I would have stopped it that day. Nobody warned me. There is nothing in writing anywhere that says I was told. I opened my laptop, turned it around, and slid it up the table to Harriet. The ticket was on the screen. His name on the top of it. The 9th of March. That's your ticket from March. You wrote the instruction yourself. Then I stopped talking, which was the hardest part, and put my hands in my lap. Harriet read it out. She read the whole thing, in her flat Yorkshire voice, including the line about going straight to the live system without waiting for a second person to read it or write down what it changed, and including the last line, where he says he will take responsibility for it. Then she read the comment underneath, which was mine, saying done, and the date. Vaughan reached for his glasses, and his hand stopped flat on the table beside them. When he spoke, his voice came out thin, and he said the word context, and nothing after it. Beatrix asked, into the silence, whether that ticket could be included in the response to her findings, and Harriet said yes. Joyce, who had waited 5 months for that specific moment, took out her phone and forwarded the ticket she had raised in May, the one that had sat open with nobody assigned to it, and said, mildly, that there was in fact something in writing, twice. Harriet asked Vaughan to wait outside. He was not in the building on Friday, and his account was closed by Monday. And the note that went round the following week was 1 sentence long, and said he had left to pursue other opportunities, which nobody in our team read out loud, because Duncan was asleep under his desk and Lydia was on the phone to a bursar. Harriet caught me in the corridor at 5:30 on the Thursday, when I had been awake for 33 hours. She said the lead role was mine, backdated to July, and the money with it, and that the first thing I was to do was turn the check back on and put my name to the procedure for restoring, because she was not living through that again. Then she asked why I looked like I was doing arithmetic, and I told her about the van, and Friday, and the semi in Marsden with the garden. She said go home now, and do not come back until Monday week. Maisie stood in the middle of her empty bedroom on the Saturday with her arms out, turning slowly, and said, Dad, the floor is flat.